Shalom all, we continue the last two chapters of the second book of Kings, chapters 24 and 25. Judah, Israel all gone, now Judah all gone. But before we continue and conclude 2 Kings, remind yourself of what has happened in the last few chapters. It is important to understand the rest of the Old Testament and specifically the Messiah coming and the New Testament. In chapters 17 verse 6 and 18 verse 11, we saw the 10 tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom, being carried away by Assyria to Halah and Habah by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes, that's Medes and Persians. They were not taken to places of Africa like Ghana nor Nigeria. Listen to the voice recording for more history for those who are doing the reading, and I shall do that now. Actually, I shall do it when I come to the verse, which is when I come to actual verse. In chapter 18, we saw why all this happened to them. The major sin of Israel, fornication, is serving other gods, not sex outside marriage. That is what got them their punishment. It is time the false meaning of fornication is dispelled. The number one sin against God is false God worship, and the only reason to put away a wife, as mentioned by Messiah in Matthew chapters 5 verse 32, which says, "But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, except for," or saving for, it says in King James's, "for the cause of fornication, cause of her to commit adultery." And as I've said in the past, fornication, as we saw, is a number, what we see in second book of Kings and other places, is the number one sin against God. In 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 20, just to give you some memory of what we read, it says, "And Yahweh rejected all the seed of Israel and afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of the spoilers until he had cast them out of his sight." In verse 23, it says, "So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cuthah and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof." Verse 17-18. "Therefore Yahweh was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah." Now that does not mean he cast Israel away, because we read in the New Testament, Paul says that God has not cast Israel away. However, the prophecies of those of Zechariah chapters 10 verse 6 and verse 10, Ezekiel chapters 48 verses 1 to 7 and 25 to 28, Jeremiah 31 to 33, and Hebrews chapters 8 verse 10 and 10 verses 16 to 17 will be fulfilled in the New Testament. I'll give you some of the, just a memory of them. Jeremiah 31:33 says, "But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith Yahweh, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people." So notice the covenant was only with Israel, the cast away, lost nations, tribes. Hebrews chapters 10 verse 16. "This is a covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith Yahweh. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. And their sins and iniquities will I remember no more." So what iniquities? The iniquities of we just read in 2 Kings. Messiah Yeshua, wrongly named, his name was wrongly changed to Jesus, came to fulfill the prophecies of reuniting the 12 tribes into one nation under his singular heavenly kingship. It is for this reason he told the disciples not to go to the Gentiles, those that replace Israel in the land or the other side of the Jordan, those 10 tribes, because it wasn't the original Israel in those lands. Babylon had replaced them. Later, Paul and Barnabas were sent to teach the scattered tribes, while the apostles remained among Judah in Jerusalem, all being taught about the new king and husband, who Israel was, who just died, husband Yeshua, who just died, so that the nation, Israel, and bride of God could remarry and return to him. Remember, the law says only if the husband dies can a wife be taken back, or remarry, should I say. As we see in the New Testament, the apostles started to do this, teach and reunite Israel into one Messiah, as they began to do when 3,000 accepted him as the Messiah in Acts chapter 2 verse 41, 5,000 in Acts chapters 4 verse 4, and the rest of the New Testament, the book of Acts, so that in Acts chapters 19:26 it says almost the whole of Asia was hearing about this Messiah and coming back to the God of their fathers. So it is not to do with the newly formed Christian denominations who do not keep his commandments, laws and holy days, but excuse the reason for not keeping it with grace, love or belief. Being the Babylonians who feared God of Israel yet worshipped being like the Babylonians who feared God of Israel yet worshipped the host of heaven, meaning the sun and the moon, etc. In 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 32 we are told, so they, this is the people who were replaced in the land, feared Yahweh and made unto themselves of the lowest of them priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the house of the high places. Verse 33, they feared Yahweh and served their own gods, after the manner of the nations whom they carried away from thence. It is said by a certain group or groups that Judah ended up in far Africa when fleeing in AD 70, when the temple was destroyed. They used these words of Yeshua in Matthew 24:16, which says, then let them which be in Judah flee into the mountains. If you have not noticed yet when you've read where we are so far and saw the word mountains, keep an eye out for when the Bible refers to mountains or the mountains, and see if it ever refers to ones over 3,000 miles away in far Africa. It never does. So the fleeing in AD 70 was not to Africa. Okay, before we start on to chapters 24 verse 1, I'll just read you the last couple of verses of chapters 23 so we get the context. It's continued from Jehoiakim reigns in Judah. 2 Kings 23:36. Jehoiakim was 20 and 5 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of Yahweh, according to all that his fathers had done. Now we move on to chapters 24, verse 1.
Chapter 24. In his days Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord which he spake by his servants the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight, for the sins of Manasseh according to all that he did, and for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood which the Lord would not pardon.
So points to consider. Nebuchadnezzar needed a reason to attack Jehoiakim and Judah. His rebellion was the reason. We see a lot of actions of individuals being the basis to fulfill God's will. From Joseph being thrown into a pit and sold into slavery to now, with more to come. When does free will temporarily stop, or what is its limits? Innocent people got killed by the evil. We will see this a lot, even of the prophets and apostles, and down to Revelation 6:10, which says, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Yahweh, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? So if and when we get hurt or killed, It does not mean God is not with us. It happened to our Messiah. Remember, learn to fight, but ultimately, remember Matthew 10:28. And fear not them which kill the body, but are able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell.
Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiakim his son reigned in his stead. And the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done.
Note the reign of Judah's kings are no longer mentioned in relation to that of Israel's, since Israel was taken into captivity in about chapter 17 verse 6. Neither are Israel's leaders mentioned, i.e. as in 2 Kings 15 verse 8. In the 38th year of Azariah king of Judah did Zechariah the son of Jeroboam reign over Israel in Samaria 6 months. The tribes of Israel are no longer part of the narrative, only Judah. So now going back to why Israel was taken away. Remember in 17:6 it said, in the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Syria took Samaria and carried Israel into Assyria and placed them in Hala and Haba by the river of Gozan and the cities of the Medes. Okay, well, some of the history is, in 722 or 721 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel fell to Assyria. Shalmaneser V began the attack but died before it was completed. So Israel fell to Sargon II, who took the inhabitants captive. Verses 7 through 18 give a list of all the ways that Israel was unfaithful to Yahweh. Hosea prophesies that as a punishment from God for their breaking of his covenant, the northern tribes would not return to the land. That was Hosea chapter 9 verse 3. However, they were promised restoration to the land after God had finished punishing them. That's in Zechariah chapters 10 verses 6 and verse 10. And as I said, see Ezekiel chapters 48 verses 1 to 7, 25 to 28 for the future allotment of the land to the tribes of the northern kingdom. Continuing from verse 10.
At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiakim the king of Judah went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land, those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah his father's brother king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah.
Does all include the Ark of the Covenant and sanctuary items? See also chapters 25 verse 13 below. Again, we see a name was changed. Okay, continuing from verse 18, Zedekiah reigns in Judah.
Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon.
to chapters 25.
Chapter 25. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And on the 9th day of the 4th month the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between two walls, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about, and the king went the way toward the plain. And the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king, and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. And all his army were scattered from him. So they took the king, and brought him up to the king of Babylon to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. And they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters of brass, and carried him to Babylon. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem. And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burnt he with fire. And all the army of the Chaldees that were with the captain of the guard brake down the walls of Jerusalem round about. Now the rest of the people that were left in the city, and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. But the captain of the guard left of the poor of the land to be vine dressers and husbandmen.
Continuing from verse 18.
And the captain of the guard took Seraiah the chief priest, and Zephaniah the second priest, and the 3 keepers of the door.
Continuing from verse 21.
And the king of Babylon smote them, and slew them at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land. And as for the people that remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had left, even over them he made Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, ruler. And when all the captains of the armies, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had made Gedaliah governor, there came to Gedaliah to Mizpah even Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Seraiah the son of Tanhumeth, the Netophathite, and Jaazaniah the son of a Maacathite, they and their men. And Gedaliah sware to them and to their men, and said unto them, Fear not to be the servants of the Chaldees. Dwell in the land, and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you. But it came to pass in the 7th month that Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the seed royal, came, and 10 men with him, and smote Gedaliah, that he died, and the Jews and the Chaldees that were with him at Mizpah. And all the people, both small and great, and the captains of the armies, arose and came to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldees. And it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he begat to reign, did lift up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, out of prison. And he spake kindly to him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings that were with him in Babylon, and changed his prison garments. And he did eat bread continually before him all the days of his life. And his allowance was a continual allowance given him of the king, a daily rate for every day, all the days of his life.
Okay, I hope you're getting the picture. We end the book of Kings with both Israel and Judah gone from the land they inherited through God. The reason should be plain and clear, for not keeping God's commandments. Also all the years of hard work, assets of gold and other gifts they gained from other nations, and their respect they had from other nations, all gone. Why? Deuteronomy chapters 29 verse 24. God told them by Moses, Even all the nations shall say, Wherefore have Yahweh done this unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? Then men shall say, Because they have forsaken the covenant of Yahweh, God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them forth out of the land of Egypt. The covenant was at least chapters 20 to 24 verse 7, what Moses wrote in the book, and they said, all of these things we will do. Of course, it also has other instructions of God. That included, at least like basic covenant, Exodus chapters 20 verse 8, the weekly Sabbath and the seventh day, and Exodus chapter 23:14, and 3 of the annual holy days of God, which you may not be keeping. If not keeping them brought the great wrath of God on his people, what rational reason should you or those who are not his people, say the Gentiles, think they get more leniency or are wiser? Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 5. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as Yahweh my God commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the other nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who have God so near unto them, as Yahweh our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great that has statutes and judgments so righteous as all this land which I set before you this day? So Israel all gone, Judah left few in number, just as Yahweh warned them in Deuteronomy 28:62, which says, and you shall be left few in number, whereas you were as the stars of heaven for the multitude, because thou wouldest not obey the voice of Yahweh thy God. And it shall come to pass that as Yahweh rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so Yahweh will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. And Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even to the other, and there shall serve other gods. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But Yahweh shall give thee a trembling heart and a failing of eyes and sorrow of mind. Deuteronomy 28:68. And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondsmen and bondswomen, and no man shall buy you. Now many people are taught to put, or shall I say some people are taught to put Deuteronomy 28:68 into a different time period to the previous verses. I see no, i.e. the 16th century slavery. I see no legitimacy in that. It is the same event and time period. One time taken away and the consequences. Lastly, for the mercy, love and belief camp, remember how Hezekiah and David received God's mercy, what we call grace today, for keeping or at least trying to keep his commandments. Well, grace is given to those who do the same, not the disobedient. Exodus chapter 20 verse 6 says, by God, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Shalom, until tomorrow, happy studies, God willing.